because, I mean, he's really running the country into the ground. I just can't imagine. I would be worried if I was in his shoes and had to address a crowd of 20 or 30,000 people that someone might just be fed up and throw a brick at me or something.
Just if I can just jump in for a second, Mohammed, you cannot have 5 years of extreme authoritarianism and then have a couple of weeks of democracy. It doesn't work like that. So in that sense, going around the country is the kind of show that they have to put up to signal some sort of support, even though this is very fictional and in fact reduced. But it seems to me that the most interesting part of the campaign is the fact that they're talking about a fantasy that is going on only in the mind of the regime and the propaganda. So in that sense, these are all components of the same film play. We got the main lead, the main hero, and then you got the other 8 candidates, and regional importance, of course, yes, but no one that does have the kind of nationwide recognition that Muhammadov enjoys. And then you have this going around the country, giving present to the people. It has become so entrenched. It's actually bizarre. And I really wonder why they bother at all at this stage. And it is incredible that after 10 years, we keep talking about this. If we look at elections at sort of benchmarks, or if you want, or checkpoints of what the regime has done, we can see that the performance has really deteriorated in the face of of this kind of periodic coronation that we're seeing. So I am actually more puzzled than I was before about this coming vote.
If I may add to this, I mean, this for Turkmenistan, it's sort of a ritual. And to add to Bruce's point about the security, we in the past 2 weeks, I received three different reports about alleged protests in different regions of the country. One I received last night about a protest in Balkan. Of course, it's very difficult to verify those reports and to check and confirm it independently. That's why we are not reporting. And even if those reports that were sent to me are false, I mean, the fact that there is such a rumor that protest is possible in Turkmenistan is an indication of there is some discontent among the public.
Yeah. One thing I would just like to add very quickly is that Bruce is right. This is all heavily scripted, and the people who participate in these meetings with the candidates are hand selected by the government. But I think the part of the reason why the government bothers to do this is so that it can have a veneer of support. It wants to be able to claim a popular mandate. Berdimuhamedov wants those inflated numbers, that inflated victory, so that he can say he's been elected.
Yeah, this is such a tragically funny stuff, but at the end, we all know whose name will come out from the ballot boxes as a winner, but will his third-term presidency be any different? Let's do some brainstorming on that shortly. First, let me recap the debate that today on the Majlis, Arafia Central Asia podcast, we are discussing Turkmenistan's upcoming presidential elections. Joining the debate are from Glasgow, UK, Dr. Lukan Chesci, the author of a book on Turkmenistan's neutrality. From Washington, Dr. Victoria Clement is joining us, who's the senior fellow at the Woodrow Wilson Center. Tuning in from Prague is Bruce Pannier, editor of Kışlak Ovozi, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty Central Asia blog, and Faruk Yusufi, the director of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty's Turkmenistan service. I am Mohammed Tahir, host of the Majlis here in Washington, D.C. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, it has been a difficult second term with lots of challenges. First and foremost, economic difficulties and its impact on people. Let's recall some of the highlights of his second term. Let's start with you, Bruce.
Oh, highlights or lowlights? Well, let's start out with the fact that Turkmenistan's economy is run on pretty much based on gas exports, and it lost Russia as a customer last year. The ongoing dispute with Iran means that they're not making any money off of that right now. And that leaves China as their only customer. We know that China's loaned them a lot of money, and some of the gas that goes to China is considered repayment of the loans that they've given to Turkmenistan. And at this point, I will say that Line D, which is supposed to be the big line of the Central Asia China gas pipeline, is horribly behind schedule at the moment. We talked to people in Kyrgyzstan who said no one's even brought it up since December 2015. That was the key one for Turkmenistan, because that was going to be 30 billion cubic meters of gas, which was probably all coming from the Turkmen fields to China. It's at least 5 or 6 years off schedule now. And that means that with the existing pipelines they got there, they only got 55 billion cubic meters of capacity. 10 billion cubic meters of that goes to Kazakh gas, 10 billion goes to Uzbek gas, which leaves 35 billion cubic meters for Turkmen gas, and that's almost as much as they pumped this last year. So revenues are not going to go up at all, practically, from this point for the next, pretty much the better part of the next decade. So they're out there. GDP growth was about 14% on the eve of the election in 2012. It's down to about 5, somewhere between 5 and 6. So it dropped almost 10% in this last term. We know there's been food shortages in the country. It just kind of runs the whole, anything you can look at in society, subsidies for utilities, water and things like that, about to be taken away from the people because they can't afford to give it to them for free like they have for all these years. Security problem on the Afghan border, much worse. 2012, no problem at all. Now, we don't know exactly, but we do know that there's a problem, and it has spilled over into Turkmenistan more than once. So there is no highlight to point to.
Okay, Dr. Luca, how did he cope with these challenges that Bruce mentioned?
Look, to be fair, these shocks were mostly external. I mean, the Iran withdrawal was, more of a Turkmen sort of problem. But the problem with the Afghans at the border and the troublesome relationship with Gazprom were actually sort of not all his fault. So it seemed to me that rather than giving him the regime the fault for everything that happened, I could detect a very sort of short-term reaction policy. So when they saw that the relationship with Gazprom was deteriorating, rather than just looking for potential partner, they kept doing the same, which means engaging in this long negotiation for 30-40 BCM pipelines, rather than focusing on smaller deliveries, 7 or 8, which may actually have the economy go. When it comes to Afghanistan, I didn't really, at the border, I don't see that discussed very much in any kind of official media, which seems to me that they're doing the same thing, which is just ignoring, at least sort of in a sort of outward level, what's going on. They may be worried, they are worried, but we haven't seen any sort of visible reaction about that policy. For me, the biggest failure that we've seen in the last 10 years is the realization that the economy needed change and nothing has been done. Bruce made sort of, all these numbers about how growth was in 2012 and how good it is now. We can even go back to his first election in 2007. I would be very surprised if we can see any kind of substantive change in the way in which the economy is led, is articulated, and production is structured across Turkmenistan. The economy has been unchanged, and this is no longer sustainable at a time in which you are trading gas at half the price that you were five years ago. And this is something that will go down in history as the regime's fault.
Dr. Victoria, and yes, talking about his second term, we should also not forget that he had a first term. So was he any better in dealing with the challenges that Dr. Lucan Bruce mentioned in his second term compared to his first term? Is he getting better in dealing with leadership challenges that he faced or his country faced?
He has challenges beyond the economic, so that there are questions of social and cultural issues. And I don't think we can say that things are getting better, but it is worth pointing out, I think, that there were some improvements since President Niyazov's time to President Berdimuhamedov. There's been greater use of the internet, improvement of the health sector, a recovery from the former president's policies in education, and some liberalizing reforms related to small and medium enterprises. And I know that this isn't enough, because we're still missing an independent media. They still don't have real political pluralism. There's still a lack of freedom of association. So there are real social and cultural pressing issues that need to be dealt with. Berdi Muhamedov started talking about reform and undertook some. He needs to undertake more.
Farukh, talking about his second term, we cannot avoid discussing about the crackdown against some of the few remaining independent journalists in the country. How have been your reporters coping with the intensified pressure?
As you know, last year, one of our reporters, Sapar Mehmet Nepeskulu, was jailed, and we still don't know about his fate. Not the previous year, 2015, Sapar Mehmet was jailed. And last year, beginning September, we started feeling more pressure when they called our correspondents for questioning, and then Sultan Achilova, a 67-year-old reporter, was attacked 3 times in 1 month. Finally, on December 3rd, our correspondent was arrested. Since then, we haven't heard anything from him about him, except for that we could confirm that he was tortured heavily. And these signs, the attack and crackdown on civil society and journalists is some sort of indication that the regime is getting nervous and making nervous moves. And the situation is probably for the Turkmen person listening in Turkmenistan, that could sound exaggeration because they get used to this kind of situation. But from what we see from Prague, sitting in Prague, the situation is worsening, and there are new restrictions every day. For example, they're restricting withdrawal of money from the banking cards. We reported about that yesterday. Last week we reported about restriction of the money transfers to the students studying abroad, which means that a lot of students have to quit their studies abroad because they cannot get money from their families in Turkmenistan. So this kind of restrictions immediately affecting ordinary Turkmens, we're seeing new and new every day. There is, I don't know how the things will change, because as other participants of the discussions pointed out, the credibility of the country or the stability of the country was based on the presumption that the prices for the energy would stay high and everything would be okay in the country's economy. But it turned out to be not true.
Bruce, if he elected for the third term, what are some of the main and immediate challenges that he will inherit from himself?
That's a good way to put it. They're going to have to do something about their currency policy. There's just no doubt about it. It is absolutely contradictory to good trade practices. I know that they don't want to have a drastic devaluation, which will certainly happen if they decide to let their money, the manat, float, but they're going to have to do it. They can't trade with this artificial rate that they keep doing. Now, of course, they would have seen what happened in Kazakhstan last year, when at the end of 2015, Kazakhstan decided to let the rate float. And then in early first half of 2016, we saw protests that the likes of which we hadn't seen in 20 years. This has got to be scaring some of the Turkmen officials, but this is inevitable. They cannot leave the manat at the rate that it is. It's strangling their ability to trade and attract foreign investment, bring new foreign partners into projects that they're doing. So that's one thing that's got to be confronted immediately. They have also got to get rid of these false ideas that these other pipelines that they're trying to get through, TAPI 1, Trans-Caspian, and other, are going to happen anytime soon. They keep billing this as like savior projects for the country. If we can just hold on for a couple more years, we'll have these things built, and then it'll be going. Time is going to run out on these promises pretty soon. TAPI is supposed to be up in 2019, according to Berdi Muhamedov and his crew, and it's not even close. They have supposedly they have some sections laid in Turkmenistan, and Pakistan reported that it was starting to do some there. But the key link here is, besides Baluchistan and southern Pakistan, is Afghanistan, where nothing is being done at all at the moment toward building TAPI. So they're going to have to give up on that and come up with some other savior projects that are more realistic to try to keep people waiting with some hope for a little while longer. But like I said, and to be fair, last comment, people have already mentioned in this thing that a lot of the stuff that's happening to Turkmenistan is not Berdimuhamedov's fault. That's true. A lot of external factors have worked against Turkmenistan in the last 2 years, 3 years, and they are suffering from that. But the government's reaction to these problems has been denial or just flat out lying about the severity of the problem, and it's not helping anything.
Dr. Luca, challenges are accumulating from some time already. And what should he do differently, indeed, if he becomes president for the third term, to be able to deal with these challenges that we are discussing today?
Well, we cannot expect that change happens just when things are immediately wrong. There will have to be a point in which someone in Ashgabat start telling the president that change needs to come, otherwise the whole house just folds. And I think, for me, the very first thing that they will have to do, this goes beyond, of course, improvement in human rights, social rights, that goes beyond, without saying. But I think that the first thing that they will have to do, they will have to start revising the energy policy. They will have to get to a point in which some external partner must be allowed to invest in onshore gas fields. So if you bring that up, you start production going, you get more money coming through, and you have an easier capacity to export. That could also bring jobs in the short terms. We know that there have been a lot of sort of layoffs in Turkmengastroy, in the different regional departments. So that could sort of alleviate a little bit the pressure on the people. And then, so once you open up the energy sector and having a more realistic pipeline policy, those would be the two most immediate challenges for me. Also because I don't think that any other sector is developed. So rather than saying we will go petrochemicals or we'll keep exporting electricity to Afghanistan, I think that what they should realistically do is to change in the things that they have, which is gas. And then take it from there. But I don't have a crystal ball, of course, and we don't make predictions. But I struggle to see this kind of regime going on for 5 more years in this way, with only one customer, with a very repressive social policy, with a very opaque rights policy, with no participation. I can't see things going on for 5 years more, even if I agree with Central Asia got a lot of sort of the resilience. The population are resilient. I cannot see this kind of sort of trend going on in the same direction for 5 years. Change will have to come. So if I were an advisor, I would tell him that he will have to start changing before things change him in that sense.
Unfortunately, we have to conclude the discussion. The final point, Dr. Victoria. Dr. Luca just made an interesting point. If you would be advisor of the President Berdimuhamedov in his term, what would be your advice that he should start doing immediately?
I think that Luca listed some important things. We can't expect anything more than incremental reform, if any. And those political rights and civil liberties are something that need to be focused on.
Okay, great stuff. Thank you very much, Dr. Victoria Clement, Woodrow Wilson Center Fellow, also an author of upcoming book on Turkmenistan. Dr. Lukan Chesci, Chair of the Glasgow University's Central Asian Studies. Bruce Pannier, Editor of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty's Central Asia blog. Kishlak Awazi and Farooq Yusufi, Director of the Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty's Turkmen Service. Thank you very much for your time and thoughts, ladies and gentlemen, today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And this is from me, Mohammed Tahir, host of the Majlis, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty's Central Asia podcast. Until next week, bye-bye.